friends, and welcome back to Seed Club's podcast. My name is Jess. We have the privilege here of speaking with the folks building at the edges of the social crypto space, and today I have, a two-part conversation. We have the privilege of speaking with Julian Weisser and Will Papper, who are two contributors to a project that's taking crypto Twitter and even some of the mainstream media by storm, a group that are trying to buy the U.S. Constitution, or at least the one privately held copy of it. As we speak, I'm sitting here Monday evening, November 15th. Nearly 1,000 ETH has been raised in the crowdfund. Countless hours of work has been put into the formation and the launch of Constitution DAO. And last night I had the opportunity to sit down with the two gentlemen and get a first-hand take in the middle of the creation. Like they are right dead smack in the middle of a 7-day process, going from formation to hopefully a winning bid on this auction in Sotheby's, which takes place on Thursday, which I guess is this afternoon, given time of publishing. My hope here was that we have a look into the middle of the process of setting an organization like this up. And I found the conversation fascinating. After finishing the recording and posting about it on Twitter, there was some comments actually that led me to think that we probably needed to have, our second guest on board. The act of attempting to buy the Constitution has led to some well-warranted criticism around the political nature of the document, the potential racist nature of the document, and some other interesting critiques. And so we are joined by Sirsu, who's a Seed Club member and also founder of a number of interesting projects, including the CryptoCookout and BlvkHvnd. And he and I had an educational conversation for myself around what I think is a very fair critique of the Constitution, but also a very optimistic take on sort of the importance of responsibility and, through his lens at least, the opportunity that folks coming together to buy the Constitution might provide. So, two-part series. The first part diving into the craziness of trying to launch Constitution DAO, and hopefully there's some lessons in there that we can take for other such initiatives. And then a really educational conversation with Sirsu around some of the critiques, conversations that are emerging around it. Hope that I did both justice. I'm just so generally passionate and interested in this topic of building things together on the internet and having them community-owned, but also very thankful for just the thoughtful, passionate takes that all of our guests here have on this topic and just generally in the importance of Web3. So I'll leave it at that. I'm going to jump into our first part of our conversation with Julian and Will, and then we'll talk to Sirsu. Let's get into it. Gentlemen, so excited to have you join us here today. Hello, Julian. Hello, Will. Julian, do you want to just give yourself a brief introduction?
Hey, I'm Julian, one of the contributors to Constitution DAO, and during the day I'm a co-founder of a company called On Deck that helps people start companies and grow their careers.
And of course, do we need to introduce Will here, who just seems to be the most repeat guest we've ever had here on the Seed Club podcast, but you end up in interesting situations. Will, do you want to give yourself a brief introduction?
Yep, I'm Will, co-founder of Syndicate, where we set up DAOs and DAO communities and help a lot with investing, legal, and compliance. And that is why we're so excited about Constitution DAO. And then also was previously on the Seed Club podcast for Adventure Gold, where my only life goal is to be on the Seed Club podcast as many times as possible for completely unrelated projects.
Well, we'll start getting you the NFTs so you can represent that in your wallet, build that reputation. Okay, gentlemen, this has come together very last minute. You're in the middle of this crazy thing that I think I first heard about a couple days ago. There's a couple hundred people following. There's now thousands of people in the Discord and Twitter. I think it used to be called Nick Cage DAO when I first saw it. Now I think it's called Constitution DAO. Can you guys just give us a brief introduction of what the heck is this thing that you're dedicating a lot of your heartbeats to these last few days?
Yeah, maybe I'll go first, and Will, you can jump in and add some more. What we're doing here is pretty straightforward, but it's daunting. We're going out and we're collaboratively and collectively buying a copy of the U.S. Constitution, and we're going to have it be owned by the internet. Anybody who wants to own a piece of it can own a piece of it, and it's going to be available for people to interact with in person, and experience in person, and learn about both the U.S. Constitution and about Web3. Learn about how they can also be an owner of it. They'll be able to just look at the placard right next to it and say, oh, wow, this is something that I can be a part of right now. And they could join the community right then and there while looking at this Constitution. And really our goal is to spread sort of the word of what Web3 is, what's possible with Web3, and what better way to do it than to raise tens of millions of dollars to collaboratively buy one of the most important historic artifacts of, at least of American history.
Yeah, one thing that I love about it is that DAOs are so participatory, and governments as well, and the Constitution also represents this idea of a participatory republic. And what combining this gets us is public stewardship of this historic artifact, where anyone can govern the Constitution and choose, for example, where it's displayed, where it goes next. Maybe it's a rotating exhibit among multiple cities. And this is a way to help show that crypto is really about participation. That's, I think, the biggest gap between the crypto space and outside of the crypto space. That outside the crypto space, crypto is viewed as exclusive. Inside the crypto space, it's viewed as inclusive. And to spread that message of inclusivity, to spread that message of participation is something that's really, really important for the whole crypto community.
I love that. So, what interested me about both getting you guys on here today was both, I think what you just touched on here, like how interesting this project is, the implications of it, the size, the scale, the sort of broad appeal, and, what I often refer to as like the adventure, right? What is the adventure that we're going on? It's quite the adventure, truly, that you're charting here. But I'm also like fascinated with sort of, I love this idea of just sort of, there's this lake, and then we get to put our head under the lake, and it's teeming with life. Like, what is going on? And I think that's like DAOs generally. And you're in the midst of this sort of, building this project that is just gaining so much momentum and energy and attention that I think if we put our heads under the water, there's a lot of really interesting insights that we can pull, specifically at this moment as you're still sitting in this. It's a world of potentiality. It's a world of risk of failure. Like it's all on the line here. And so I want to both get into the context and interestingness of the project itself, and then hopefully dive into some of like the opportunities, challenges, the operational side of things. So maybe let's start off with like this broad narrative. Like why the Constitution? Why this copy of the Constitution? And why now?
I think Will brought up a really great point about participation and how important that is to the American experiment and also to Web3. And I think that, when we consider what could be done with this project, it's really an example of showing the capabilities of the new forms of collaboration and participation with Web3. And what better way to do that than to connect it to a document that is so representative of what has come before. And creating that actual link, I think, is really something that people get excited about. I think that one thing that I've been just really blown away by is seeing how every sort of political ideology, both sides of the aisle, every place of the spectrum seems to really be coming together over this. And I think that's because everybody has this shared sort of relationship, or it has their own unique relationship, I should say, with America, with what America means to them, with what it means to their family, the challenges that they faced here, the amazing opportunities that they've found. And when you consider that, I think that really elevates this to something much more than a crowd fund, much more than, your standard sort of like NFT or something like that. And there's all sorts of amazing projects. I'm not trying to denigrate, but there's something really emotionally powerful about this. And we're not even talking about the meme layer, which I think is another part of this that is really important. We could talk about that later, but I'll pause there and see if Will, if you want to add something.
The thing that caught my attention, the reason why I wanted to join Constitution DAO, was because it struck me as one of those things that seemed unachievable. And crypto is just incredible at achieving the unachievable. Like, we already have just a few days, like, we are already talking with like museums who would want to display this and who would want to partner with us on it. We're talking directly with Sotheby's and also confirming that we have everything in place we need for the bid. We're setting up a fundraise for the crowdfund. We're setting up a legal entity. We're setting up all of these different pieces that are just coming together incredibly quickly. And it's like, I believe we'll succeed. I certainly hope we'll succeed. The fact that we even have the infrastructure in place to make this happen, between like DAO collaboration, between Syndicate and Juicebox, between all these individual people jumping in, between the memes that people have created. It's just like, whoa, we have a group springing up out of nothing in a few days that now already has the capabilities to potentially buy the Constitution. All we need is the money at this point. Everything else is basically in place, which is just absolutely incredible.
Okay, that is actually incredible, because I think before we started recording here, I was talking with Julian and about just the, and I think we've talked about this on the show quite a bit, is just like the challenges of actually having DAOs interact with the real world. And, I think that's a thing I really want to dive into. But like, Julian, when I was talking to you yesterday, you sort of updated your percentage chance of this actually working, like real time in the call. Can you, like, where are we sitting today? Because I think previously you were saying like maybe 20%, then you're like 50%. Are we north of 50%? Are we low? Like, what's your gut?
Yeah, so I'll walk you through sort of the iterations there. I think at the beginning, a few people reached out to me. Austin and Graham reached out to me on Twitter. It sounds like a few other folks were also looking at sort of this idea of, hey, wouldn't it be cool to try and buy the Constitution? But they were the ones who reached out to me. It was such a wacky idea. I never met these gentlemen before. I didn't really know anything about them, but it started to get a little bit of traction on Web3 Twitter, and I said, this is really intriguing. I think the biggest challenge here is actually going to be the turnaround time to get the legal entity in place, to get the structure in place. The money seems like it could sort of take care of itself if everything else was in place, and I was just pretty hesitant that we'd be able to dot all of the I's and cross all of the T's in time to make this happen. That was my biggest hesitation. And, I think that the power of the meme is really what has propelled this forward so much. And then, of course, all of the infrastructure that's being built by folks like Syndicate, by folks like Juicebox. But this power of the meme to sort of create the belief that this is possible, or even the idea that it might be possible, is something that probably was the main thing for me that got me thinking that this thing had legs. And then my sort of every little sort of milestone that we made along the way has gotten my percentage chance up. That was about 20%, when we did that Zoom call with maybe 14 people at the very beginning. And then, it's crawled up. Yesterday it was probably at about 50% before a few milestone unlocks. And then today we had this amazing call with Sotheby's this morning. I mean, the fact that so many of these folks from Sotheby's showed up, in the morning, Sunday morning, to chat with us really, really goes to show the excitement around the potential of this story that Sotheby's can be a part of with us, that we can co-create together. It really goes to show there's something special here.
I really like that idea of being able to pull, like, the idea of collaboration and pulling people into a story. In many ways, I think Web3 or crypto is sort of like us versus them, like the establishment versus the sort of upstart. And I think in your story there, like the idea of people coming in Sunday morning to hang out, to be a part of this story, like the size and scale of this, I think is what is fairly notable here. There's a tweet from Shlome's, everybody's favorite Twitter performance artist. They formed a DAO to purchase the Constitution. Will be the next. They did surgery on a grape, which I thought, I think it's, there is this sort of sense of gravity to this thing, like to it being pulled off. I'm curious, like what have been like the big sort of milestones that you've seen? You talked a little bit about legal entities, but how about in the early days, going from 20 people on a Zoom call to that, oh my God, this might actually happen?
Well, I have my answer, but Will, I'm curious yours because I don't think I've heard it. What's your take on sort of how you've experienced this so far?
So, there's this interesting piece of the discussion that I think is under the surface and why this has gotten so popular. But a key milestone is the fact that it's starting to enter the consciousness. So I think that at the beginning, there was this idea of, oh, it's so wacky, we can buy the Constitution. Isn't that kind of crazy? Like, we can do this. And there was just kind of this like aspect of absurdity to it of, wait, crypto can buy a Constitution? But underneath that was the message of all of us together can buy a Constitution. And all of us participating in this like radical experiment of collaboration can make some incredible milestone happen. And in my mind, that's been the key shift, is that in the first few days, everyone was just like, this is a wacky idea. And now people are starting to see the power of what this idea of participatory governance of course, one of the foundational documents of participatory governance really means. And that's where I think that we're starting to, I guess, cross the Rubicon, where like this is now starting to be seen as something that anyone can join. How many new Discord members? The first milestone in my mind was when we started gaining, what was it, 200 new Discord members an hour? Yeah. And that was as of yesterday. So like it's picked up even more since then. Where like at the beginning it was, these people have this wacky idea. Now it's like, whoa, I can participate. Anyone can participate in making this happen. And I think that when the fundraise is set up, which is going to happen very, very soon, will be one step further, where now it's not just, I can like also participate and share my thoughts. It's now also like, I can help bring this to life directly. And it's not even about how much money you have to contribute. It's about you can send that link to friends. You can start to share it out. You can start to onboard people onto crypto, showing them, hey, like, what if your first crypto transaction is helping play a role in buying the Constitution? It is, I think, this just like radical participatory experiment that started from a wacky idea and now is this pretty incredible collaborative movement.
And I'll just add really quickly that I'm really surprised and heartened and inspired by seeing how many people I know who've never participated in crypto, or maybe they had a Coinbase account, but they never participated to the extent that they had a Rainbow wallet or a MetaMask. Seeing them join the Discord, learn how to get MetaMask or Rainbow or something else, and then actually get ready in anticipation of participating in this, and the excitement around that they have. These are really talented people in technology, but not Web3 people. I think this is the onboarding experience for potentially tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people in the future into Web3 through something that is tangible, through something that is emotional, and through something that is participatory in a way that I think people can actually really wrap their hands around or really understand. That's different than, I think that there is this psychological challenge for people when it comes to NFTs and things like that. That's not to say that there isn't a lot of value in NFTs and digital art, but it's certainly something that, there's a hurdle there. I think there's actually less of a hurdle to the idea of co-ownership of something that's a physical asset.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think so. Look at how many different NFT platforms today started off with the crossover of NFT and physical goods. I think there's definitely something there. You touched on two themes that we see coming up so often in the work we do at C Club and on this podcast. One is just the power of momentum and the idea of just incremental and then all of a sudden exponential sort of attention and growth and participation. And then two is just like, 100% agree that the way that we onboard the next 100 million people into Web3 is through community experiences like this. Ones where there's high trust being built, or there's some really crazy adventure that gives a much more that you're joining to be a part of this movement rather than joining to speculate or to invest. I think there's like a very noticeable difference there, and I mean it's why I just am the most optimistic that I've ever been about the space. Like it's every one of these adventures that we go on creates a possibility for many, many more, right? Like the spread of the number of people who are thinking about doing crazy shit. Like this is stupid and wild. And I mean, maybe we can just frame that quickly. How much do you need to raise to even have a chance at winning this?
It's a good question. It's anybody's guess, really, quite frankly. The range on Sotheby's, and in terms of their estimate, is 15 to 20 million. And the reality is we just don't know. I would guess that it's going to be much higher than that. The thing is, the last copy of the Constitution that sold publicly at a public sale was at Sotheby's, and it was this copy. It was 33 years ago, and I believe it sold for about $180,000 at that time. So inflation is crazy, but it's not that crazy, and the value has gone up considerably, and I anticipate that the estimated value is going to be a lot lower than what the actual final bid is. So we're prepared to raise quite a lot, and we're excited to really make a go of this.
And the thing that I think is really radical about this whole experiment is like this is not a profit seeking enterprise. There is no expectation of profit for anyone involved, any contributors, anyone who puts money in the crowdfund. This is a non-profit, working on it, non-profit in spirit, hopefully non-profit in entity. That's what we're tracking down this week. But yes, this is a like collaborative, like non-profit oriented enterprise. And what this leads to is just this really incredible idea of governance, where like we're going to raise $15 to $20 million, not because people think the Constitution will be more valuable later on. They're donating it. We're going to raise $15 to $20 million because people want to be part of this experiment in governance and how we can collectively steward this very important piece of history. So it's not even like, oh, look, crypto has so much money. Like they like put together $20 million. It's like, because this is not a profit-seeking enterprise. Crypto is donating $20 million to acquire this historical document. It's also, the money is going to a foundation, and that foundation has done previous work in constitutional studies. It's a very cohesive ecosystem, and it's not some experiment in speculation. It's an experiment in governance, and it's an experiment in participation. And that is unique, and that's something that I think is different from NFTs and other aspects where there is an explicit profit motive to it.
Yeah, I think it's so important that those are the stories that start to bubble up in crypto rather than the speculative ones. And it's can be challenging just given the sort of velocity and excitement that comes around, PFPs going up or Shiba going up or whatever. But I think this has a great chance of doing that. So, okay, let's maybe dive into some of the practicalities of this. And we were just talking about the crowdfund being one of them. Well, actually, let's go here. So there's crowdfund, there's legal, there's how do you actually get people aligned around sort of a common mission? And Julian, you were sort of alluding to this ability to, or being surprised by the number of people who've come in. But my guess is that there was a lot of work behind the scenes to sort of get people interested in it. Can you tell me a little bit about how you guys were thinking as a collective about growing your ranks, making sure you had the talent and the practical human resources required to go pull something like this off?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that's worth noting here, and we said it at the beginning, we're contributors. We're not leaders of anything. This is an organization where there are lots of people doing all sorts of amazing initiatives. We're here to tell a story about that organization, and we're really honored to have that opportunity. In terms of the organization scaling up and people getting involved, I think that we never suffered for want of people, of talent. The great thing about Web3 and the great thing about a mission like this, as Will articulated so eloquently, there's no shortage of people who want to be involved with an amazing mission like this. If anything, I think that due to the time constraints, I think that one of our biggest challenges is around not being able to enlist every single talented, amazing person who wants to help out on a very hands-on way into the initiative. This is one of those situations where I think that the amount of time that we have is actually very beneficial. The time constraint is sort of a great forcing function. Had we heard about this a month ago or 90 days ago, I don't think we'd actually have the momentum that we do right now. I think that's because when you have 7 days, it just makes it sound even more ridiculous, even less likely to be possible, and even more audacious. And I think that at least right now, the Web3 community really leans into that sort of thing. And people just really are inspired by ambitious goals, things that seem almost impossible, but might be possible. And I think that we just from the very beginning, people were excited to at least join in and play along. And then I think that maybe people didn't necessarily believe this was quite possible, but they wanted to see what might happen. And, there were some great memes. And then it started to really solidify that, oh, wow, we might actually be able to make this happen. So the team has scaled a little bit, but, it's really a thing where it's still staying relatively small in the regard that, we just have to be super focused and heads down on getting things to goal in such a short span of time. I'll let Will jump in and fill in some additional details, but one additional thing that I would add is really related to the fact that there are so many different ways to contribute to a DAO or to a mission like this, and people who've helped other people set up wallets, people who've created really great art or tweets. These people honestly have done so much to actually further the spread of Constitution DAO and further the spread of the imagination. I think it's like a collective imagination thing. And we've had probably well over 100 people who've now filled out the volunteer form since we posted it less than 24 hours ago. So there's no shortage of people, and it's really exciting because that means that if you have an ambitious goal in Web3, you really don't have to worry about not having great people who want to build it with you.
Yeah, I think it's almost like there's almost an opposite problem in some cases, which I think you're almost touching on here, where sometimes the amount of people who want to lean in can actually be overwhelming for a project, especially early on, and that there's like a lot of these challenges that might not be best solved by throwing a whole lot of human beings at it. But I do think it's like, and it's a tension I see coming up a lot if we sort of put a lens on like what can we learn from building DAOs or building a process like this, where there is this one camp, a broad belief of like flat hierarchy and or no hierarchy, flat organization, everybody can lean in, everything's done on a consensus basis. You come up against some real challenges in that, right? Which is that making decisions gets significantly more complicated. And instead, what we're really seeing in most successful DAOs is smaller groups of people coming in to lean in more, I guess, help make those fast decisions early on. That almost sort of builds a legitimacy or authority there that then sort of leads into not this like hierarchical top-down, you are the boss type thing, but rather because of access to information or because of relationships that have been built, or sort of like just the natural progression of the work that gets done, you kind of end up with these multiple leaders. And so like when I have like a window into your organizations, I see these multiple leaders who've done an exceptional job at moving core areas of this project forward. But truly the accessibility of that next layer out, I think, which is, I love described as imagination. I think that's like just an absolutely great word to describe the importance of folks engaging in everything from chats to Twitter to introductions to the customer support is what you're talking about here when you're trying to get people onboarded with new wallets, which again, back to our point of onboarding new people into crypto, very, very important thing to be able to get people to hold their own keys. Huge barrier still that exists. And I think these sort of projects can overcome them. Well, I'm curious from your perspective, like what does the HR component of this DAO look like? And because I know you're sort of looking at a different part of this organization.
Yeah. One thing we tell all the DAOs we work with at Syndicate is make sure you have a really clear way for your community to contribute. Because the clearer the contribution method, the more easily your DAO can scale. And that's kind of how we've split up the responsibilities. There are some areas where there's not much clarity of how most people can contribute. So for example, like Syndicate is helping with legal formation and getting through KYC and AML processes, know your customer and anti-money laundering processes with Sotheby's. That's necessary to buy a real world asset. That's not something where there's an obvious way for people to contribute. So that makes sense to keep it small and work with a really close group of people. But then there's other areas where there is a really clear way to contribute. And that's, for example, the fundraising process, where as soon as the fundraise is live, which, we're speaking on Sunday right now, the fundraise will be live by air date, and I'll be amazed by how much is raised. We'll see. But once the fundraising process is live, the way to contribute is really, really clear. You can contribute ETH yourself if you want to, or you can also share that link with people and spread it and help other people understand the mission and values of Constitution DAO. And then that's where the contribution methods start to get really clear and start to work really well. So that's, I think, the general way that most DAOs tend to form. And I think the best method and what we advise them on at Syndicate is essentially like there's this early stage where like things are very unclear. And then you just do need a few people to say, okay, here is how we're going to handle it. And there are also some cases where it's not easy for everyone to participate. Like in legal entity formation, there's a lot of nuances to the structure that's chosen. Like, for example, like UNAs, unincorporated nonprofit associations, are commonly suggested for DAOs and something that we suggest ourselves, but it can't go through the KYC and AML process at Sotheby's, for example. So there are cases where it's not obvious for how people can contribute. And this is, I think, what gets back to the radical participation. Is like DAOs are fragile in their early stages, and they're really hard to get set up, and they're really hard to structure. But then there's a point where they scale, and that scaling can be far, far beyond what anyone thinks is possible. And as we're talking right now, another milestone is we are at this inflection point where as soon as the Juicebox fundraise is live, which it's Sunday evening now and it should be live very soon, we will be at this new milestone where the inflection point is now what DAOs are best at, where DAOs can scale really, really rapidly, where everyone can go out and share the mission and values and goals of this participatory experiment. So yeah, when people watch this, know that like we are really at the cusp of something incredible, and it's very exciting to see what will happen with it.
Well, I'm already picturing you on CNN with talks like that and just being such a great voice for this movement. Well, okay, let's dive into some of the practicalities here, because I know a lot of the work has gone into making some early decisions around some very practical aspects of it. And you're talking about the fundraise itself. There's a number of tools that, I think one of the big exciting unlocks of this last 6-8 months has been just the accessibility of tools for folks to be able to use to try to go and achieve these crazy things. We talked a lot about Mirror in the past. We've seen, a bunch of other different fundraising mechanisms. You guys have landed on using Juicebox as a platform for fundraising. I'm really curious about the thought process behind that and what Juicebox does specifically that's, useful to this project.
So, Will, maybe I'll start and you can get into a little bit more of the technicalities behind it. But when we were considering sort of the different constraints, the different needs, the different features that would be required in order to be successful here, we had a few that were really high priorities for us. The first is, we think we're going to win this. We want to win this. We're going out there. We're going to work really hard to make bids and win. Having said that, we might not win, right? And we really want people who are participating in this to have an easy way to actually get their funds back if we don't win. I think that's only the right thing to do, and that's the thing that gives people the confidence to participate in the first place. So one thing we wanted was a really solid refund mechanism. So that's one thing that we were looking for. Another thing we were looking for is we've kind of got a unique situation in that we're not actually working towards a set goal in terms of dollar amount. We aren't saying, okay, we're 90% of the way towards the goal. We have a bunch of goals and, we're going to talk about sort of the reasons we want to hit certain tiers. But at the same time, there isn't this one sort of number where it's like, okay, we got it, we're in. I mean, if we raised 150 million, maybe that's enough, but you never know with bidding. So we wanted to make sure that there was a way to essentially raise more than we needed and then be able to refund partial contributions. We would essentially chop down each person's contribution proportionally and be able to refund the remainder that wasn't used towards the bid. This is a pretty important thing for this very specific type of campaign that we're running. And, we also have this very unique aspect of the bidding is not happening on chain. The bidding is actually happening in fiat. And we need to think about that because some platforms that we're huge fans of, Party Bid by Party DAO is, it's an on-chain bidding mechanism. So it just doesn't really work for what we're trying to do. And that was another consideration. I don't know, Will, you probably have some other great thoughts about this.
Yeah, I think that there was another thing that also played a role, which is that essentially, like, we were talking about fundraising mechanisms, and Juicebox is like in the DAO, and they say to us like, hey, we've already passed governance proposals preemptively to support Constitution DAO. Like, we've already passed proposals to waive the fees, which would have been like 500K or more. We have people in your Discord doing walkthroughs. We can get you set up on Rinkeby right now so you can play with this. And I think that there's this interesting like Web3 native future where DAO collaboration, like with Syndicate and Juicebox both, like we're not selling a product here. We are participating in the DAO just like every other contributor. And I think that that's really like, people talk about the future of DAO to DAO collaboration. And I think DAO to DAO kind of misleads people into it because it sounds like B2B. It sounds like a sales process. It sounds like a customer relationship, but it's like, no, like we just think this is cool. So like 3 like team members at Syndicate are just spending like their whole weekend working on Constitution DAO because we think it's cool. Like a bunch of people at Juicebox are spending their whole weekend like working on Constitution DAO because they think it's cool. And it's like, I feel lucky that like we can work on such fun things. And that's really, I think, what the best part of crypto is just like this joy you get from the things you do and the people you work with. That's just an absolutely wonderful thing.
And what folks can't see here on the audio is just the smile that comes across Will's face when he shares about that, which I love. And, I think the Juicebox team has been, they're just wonderful builders, Perry and Django and Nicholas. Just huge shout outs to those guys and for all their work they've been doing in the space. Big fans of them. So I was like, heck yes. I love that that's a team that you guys are working with. But I mean, geez, there's just so many amazing builders in the space. I get called an over optimist too much, but I can't help it because I know all these people and they're just amazing human beings. Okay, so I think those are all really interesting aspects, and I don't think I'd actually considered the challenge of just trying to raise more money than you actually need, and not even having that clear goal and the ability to split it back up. The fundraising in my mind when I think about it, we've talked a lot in the past about the challenges of operating DAOs that interact with the IRL, right? Like how do you actually engage with buying something physical? DAOs themselves are these wonderful digitally native organizations that can govern, digital goods and assets and make decisions in a digital way. And it's very easy for them to do. But as soon as you try to step off from the Ethereum smart contract governed world, you got to end up in a whole lot of big questions and challenges, most of which are still like really not well defined or very awkward. So to me, like fundraising, while yes, it's probably the most important thing now, and like definitely shouldn't underestimate the challenge of raising 4,000 or 5,000 ETH. Like that's definitely a significant sum. Like the red flags or the warning signs that came up, or the challenges that came up for me as I sort of was thinking about this, really fell down into two main areas, and they're both URL. One was the legal structure, and then two is like, how the hell do you actually custody something that's worth $20 million, and what does that even look like? So I'd love to dive into that to the state that we can, and I'm curious about how you approached thinking about setting up a legal entity for this DAO. What were the considerations there, and to the sort of amount that is actually clear right now, where did you guys land up?
Yeah. So luckily at Syndicate we've already done this before. Like we helped City DAO get set up with their legal entity as well, help them figure out like possible paths of donation structures. And I'd say the playbook is very similar for Constitution DAO. So this is not our first time encountering this, which helps a lot. The thing that I think is the biggest difference between the crypto world and the Web2 world is the difference in ownership. So the unfortunate thing is that a lot of the Web2 world restricts ownership. Like we are not able to give people ownership in the Constitution in exchange for the crowd fund at the point of sale. That's not something we're able to do. We can only take donations. I have had this really absurd phrase that I have said a few times this week, which is that the Constitution itself is not a security, but fractional ownership of a Constitution is. And we're not selling fractional ownership. We are taking donations, and those donations allow people to govern how that Constitution is displayed and where it's displayed. And I joke that the LLC is like a legal multisig. I keep using that phrase. It's like a legal multisig, where essentially, just like a multisig, like you're executing the snapshot votes and you're trusting the people you're advising to operate in the interest of the DAO. And that's why it matters that we have trusted community members on the multisig. That's why it matters we have trusted community members on the LLC. Like, as much as we would love to give everyone a share of the Constitution itself, we cannot do so yet. And I'm hopeful that the crypto world can prove out in the digital sphere, like these ideas of like radical ownership that will hopefully make their way into the Web2 world. Right now, it's not feasible. Like we cannot, like as an unincorporated nonprofit association, which is the closest legal analogy for DAOs, we cannot bid at Sotheby's. We need an LLC, and we need to have specific owners. I think that those things will change in the future as the crypto world starts to show what's possible. In the traditional world, you can only have 2,000 shareholders for your corporation in the US before you're regulated as a public company. In the crypto world, a DAO with 2,000 members is pretty small. So yeah, I think that is the biggest difference in interacting with the Constitution and these real world assets is what we can and can't do around ownership. And we're optimistic that it will change in the future. But right now, it is a legal multisig. Effectively, is what we have.
So I actually like that framing, because one of the big shifts I think we've seen over the last, say, year, and I think that has led to a lot of this growth in DAOs, maybe even a bit longer than a year, but definitely, certainly before, like, there's still these two eras, right? There's like the Aragon and colonies and DAO stacks era of DAOs, where there was a lot of focus on decentralization and on consensus building and sort of like minimizing trust at a contract level. And now most DAOs that we see today are, have multi-sigs at the core, right? There are trusted people that are operating these organizations. And I think for a lot of people who've been in the space for a long period of time, that was actually a tough thing to see or to sort of wrap their heads around. And yet the people who are maybe a bit newer to the space really just took that and ran. Like the ability to spin up a multi-sig and snapshot governance with a token was just like, oh, I can do the things I need to do to pragmatically move forward. And I just sort of have that moment again when you were talking about the sort of the legal structure, because in my mind, I'm like, wow, legal structure. Okay, there's like, you're introducing this whole other governance layer there that actually doesn't fit so well in with the sort of token ownership, snapshot based world that I'm sort of used to. But truly, it's not that much different, right? Like, I mean, there is definitely a legal personhood to it, and there's some liability protections, I'm assuming, and probably a bunch of benefits to it. But ultimately, we're still talking about trusted individuals. And where I sit here, I think that's just like this sort of fascination of trying to reduce trust. I think at a protocol layer makes a ton of sense. But when you start moving up the stack to where people are actually the core sort of entities interacting, I mean, the reason I can trust you that you will advise well on a project I'm working on isn't because we have a contract in place. There's a whole host of other things that are sort of at play there as well. So I think it's super interesting to sort of even use that term legal multisig.
There's this great essay that I'd highly recommend. I read it many years ago, and it made a tremendous impact on me, which is Reflections on Trusting Trust. And it's in the Unix context, where it traces through essentially, like, at what points do you have to trust someone on the chain? And the answer is you always have to trust someone on the chain, where there is no situation where something is completely 100% trustless. Because even if your software is trustless, you're still trusting your hardware manufacturer, for example, or you're trusting the creator of a compiler. You're trusting all these different parts of the chain. And I think that that's a very interesting philosophical divide in the DAO space between multisigs and progressive decentralization and pure trustless on-chain governance. Because, for example, like with on-chain governance, sure, maybe the governance itself directly on-chain is trustless, but you're trusting the voting portal you're using to record your vote accurately. You're trusting Etherscan to make this contract accessible and allow you to write to it if you want to write to the governor directly. You're trusting the people who are sharing the vote to share a link honestly and to share it correctly. You're trusting the description of the vote to be accurate with the transaction that's actually being executed. And there's always trust in the chain. Ideally, it's trust but verify, where you're trusting someone's description of what a vote does, and you can actually go in and inspect the transaction, and you can see what transaction will be actually executed. But there will always be trust. And I think that this like decentralization maximalism in DAOs is a world that we can get to at some point with the right tooling, but trying to jump to it now creates limitations because the whole chain is not trustless and likely will never be completely trustless. And you're also trading off a different set of risks. With on-chain voting, you're trading off the risk that the on-chain vote could deviate from a snapshot vote. That's another form of trust. People take a snapshot vote, and then they trust that the on-chain vote will follow the snapshot vote. And there's no accountability if it doesn't. With multisig, there is accountability. People are putting their reputations on the line in both the Gnosis safe and also the LLC, that they will be good stewards of this. In my mind, people putting their reputations on the line is more powerful than the idea of just like, oh, well, if this is starting to deviate from the snapshot vote, people will like go in and vote and make sure it aligns to the snapshot vote. Because there's no accountability there. There is accountability in a multisig. Like I have said this a few times. Basically, like, people have brought up the concerns about multisigs and LLCs, and it's like we are effectively trusting the community members on it to not run off with the money or to not run off with the Constitution. That is something that we have a very high degree of confidence in, because everyone here is honest and cares and participates in this community. If you're trusting anonymous wallets to not deviate from a snapshot vote, I don't know. I think that I would prefer the people who have a stake in the community.
That's a great point with the idea of like the anonymity and the fact that, maybe something to highlight is how, how many truly well-known individuals and also yourselves, a large number of contributors, if not the majority of contributors, are actually operating under their legal names here, which is maybe notable in and of itself. You're talking about, trust at the LLC level. To me, the big question of trust comes into like, who the heck is going to take, like, how do you custody and more importantly, like steward the future of a very important historical document that is both, fragile and extremely valuable. So I would imagine this idea of custody was sort of like a big question you guys had to tackle. What's like the outcome there?
Yeah, Will, if you want to speak to this as well, because I know you've been talking a lot to museums and things, I think that the first thing to note here is we don't want this just be a thing that is sitting in some storage facility, and it's going to be safe and it's going to be expensive to store, and it's going to be expensive to insure. But I think that the primary thing that we really want to focus on here is making sure that it's actually somewhere where people can interact with it, and also somewhere where, quite frankly, it's going to be in custody from people who are really responsible and taking good care of it while also having it on display. We're not opening a museum. There's no announcement that's going to be coming in the Discord that we're opening a museum or we're buying an actual place to house this ourselves. So in lieu of that, we're going to be looking at various museum partners to work with both now and in the future to be able to display this. And again, I think the thing that's so great about the participatory governance component here is that the community is going to decide exactly what happens there. But Will, I don't know if you want to speak more to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, that's where we want to partner really closely with nonprofit and cultural institutions to help this be a rotating exhibit where the community gets to decide where it goes next and decide who the stewards of this document are. And there's a decent window where Sotheby's will hold the Constitution for us. And at that point is when we have the time to really work closely with the community on where it should go next. Like, once we win this, I hope we win this, where does it go next? Do we want to put this in a place where there will be lots of foot traffic? Like we happen to be talking to lots of museums in New York just because a bunch of us happen to be located in New York. That's where our best connections are. Do we want to have this travel to like small towns throughout the country and allow everyone to see hands-on a document that they might not have been able to see in person because a lot of the copies are very far away? Do we want to have this travel internationally and like have this Constitution be like an artifact that can go abroad? That's up to the community to govern. That's up for them to decide. And that's something that's really exciting, is like a lot of people are talking about, hey, what are the values of this project? The values of this project are participation. The values of this project are inclusivity. But where we decide where the Constitution goes next, that is a statement of values. That is very fundamentally a statement of what we believe and where this should be shown and who should experience this. And that's where the participatory elements come in, because by voting on where it goes next, we are all voting on our values.
The community is defined by its actions.
I love that. Okay, so we're coming up on the hour, and there's maybe a couple other threads that I want to pull on. What have I missed? If I'm thinking about the hurdles or challenges you guys have had to overcome in the last few days, which is such I wrote down in my notes here, absurd. This whole thing is absurd. It's just so absurd, and I love it because of that. But over the last few days, we've talked about some of the IRL, URL challenges, some of the challenges of getting sort of trust and folks to come together. There's a time constraint challenge. Any others that maybe aren't so obvious to those on the outside that you've had to overcome?
Gosh, I think that it's just the sheer amount of work that's involved with this, and the amount of time that everybody is spending, this weekend, that people are going to be spending probably this coming week leading right up to the auction. I think this is just a major undertaking. It's on a marathon. It's kind of like one of those 100-milers or something like that. And it's everybody who's doing this, and they kind of weren't prepared to do it. It's not like everybody who's here was training for a 100-mile race. They kind of just heard about it, and they put their shoes on and decided that it was time to go. People who are undertrained for these marathons and things, they can finish, but it's hard, right? And I think that it's really about the community and people sort of willing this into existence, because unless you have that spirit of there's something really important happening here and we're all contributing to that and we're lifting each other up and sort of pulling each other towards this goal, I think that would be really hard to see us be successful, just because of the sheer amount of work, energy required to make this happen. Because again, Will said earlier, this is something that on the surface seems almost wildly unachievable. And now we've gotten to a point where, hey, we're not solid. We haven't bought this thing yet. We haven't won this auction yet. But it's certainly much more achievable now than it was 48 hours ago or 72 hours ago or whatever it might be.
I also think that one thing, DAOs are always chaotic, and having everyone be informed about the same things, working on the same things, and like pulling in the same directions is surprisingly difficult. We had how many GitHub repos were set up as Constitution DAO? There was chaos of even where should the code go. And again, that's where in the earlier stages you do need more of okay, we're going to do it this way, and then the later stages when you can more radically scale it and make it radically participatory. But yeah, I think that anyone who is curious what DAOs are like, just dive in and join the Discord, because there's no better way to understand DAOs than to join this crash course of what this is actually like. All of you watching on Thursday morning, right before the auction goes live, come join the Discord. See what it's like. It'll be chaotic. It'll be crazy. It'll be super hectic. Maybe we'll be super far from the goal. Maybe we'll be way over. Maybe our hair will be on fire. Who knows? Yeah, it's just this kind of chaos is simultaneously difficult sometimes, trying to coordinate just what is going on and who is doing it. And this chaos is also beautiful, because out of this chaos emerges these just incredible accomplishments that no individual could achieve alone. That's where we're not the core team. We don't view ourselves that way. We just view ourselves as people who are basically saying, I'll handle this. Syndicate, we're saying we'll help with entity formation, we'll help with getting through the Sotheby's auction process. Julian is doing a ton of work around slicing through that chaos, essentially. And there's no one doing a better job at keeping everyone aligned than Julian. But that's just because we volunteer to handle something. And the great part is that everyone can volunteer for what they want to handle and participate there.
The funny practical matter of that is that I think I have a call on my calendar for tomorrow with somebody who's reached out to set up a call to talk about Constitution DAO and C Club. And completely unrelatedly, Julian and I had a call that had been rescheduled a few times on Friday, and I didn't even put all these things together. And so there is just this wave or network of individuals that are all reaching out. And I just think that it's I couldn't even tell you who's at the center of this thing. I just keep discovering more and more people who are at the core of this.
Yeah, we are all Constitution DAO. There's no you're Constitution DAO and you're not Constitution DAO. Every single email you receive from someone saying they're Constitution DAO, assuming they're acting in good faith and are good stewards of this project and its values, is
I am the founder of Constitution DAO. Thank you very much. I am.
Yes, Jess, you are, and everyone watching. If you come and join the Discord and share that fundraising link with people and help participate, you are all Constitution DAO.
I feel like I want to leave it on that, but I have one other question here, which is and maybe a completely unfair question to ask of both of you right now when you're in the midst of this just get shit done mode. But what if we let's just assume this is wildly successful and we're 2 years down the line and people are looking back on this sort of this week coming up. What is it that you kind of hope to achieve, or you hope will sort of stand the test of time, or be the meme that carries on?
Do you want to go first, Will?
Yeah, I think that the thing that's interesting to me is that this is possibly the most important historical artifact that is in direct public hands in terms of governance over where it goes, how it's displayed. Obviously, there are copies of the Constitution that are stored by the government, and those are indirectly in public hands. But you can't decide what's on the plaque next to the Constitution that exists in the National Archives. You can't decide where it goes next. You can't decide what those values are that it should be displayed alongside. That's not something that individuals have an ability to choose. And I hope that 2 years from now, if we win and people are looking back on this, they see that there's this radical new model where everyone can participate in what these values are, where it's not a small group of people who are owning this and putting up plaques and deciding how it's framed and deciding how it's presented. This is, like Julian said, like this has united people across the political spectrum. And the Constitution means different things to different people.
I love that, and I agree with all of it. I'll just add an additional one, which is in 2 years, I think it would be amazing if the people who participated in the winning bid for this were completely dwarfed by all of the people who participated in ownership of the Constitution DAO after the auction, after the gavel. That would be really amazing, because that would mean that we'd onboarded so many more people into Web3. They had learned about what was possible with this new form of collaboration, these new technologies. And that, to me, in addition to what Will said, really brings it home. And yeah, we're really excited about the future.
Gentlemen, I know you have no shortage of work to get done and things to do. Really appreciate you taking an hour and a bit out of your day on a Sunday evening to chat with us here at C Club. We'll be watching in earnest over the next week. And as we do publish Thursday morning, folks, the crowdfund is live right now. The auction is about to happen. You're listening to conversation with folks that have happened on a Sunday evening as they prepare to sort of advance into the final stretches of what was an ultra marathon over 7 days. And so I guess Constitution DAO on Twitter is a really great place. I'm sure there'll be a lot of action happening there. We'll be tweeting about it at C Club as well, if you're looking to find the right links to get into where the discussion is. Sort of this live experience of being in a Discord as something big is happening is something that I was reflecting on the other night. And just it's so unique. It's like this troll box, but evolved. It is quite the experience. So if you're sitting here, you're not in a DAO. I mean, we speak to good luck if you're sitting here, you're not remotely in a DAO, because I think this conversation could be a little deep for that, but respect if that's who you are. Hop into this Discord. It's going to be a cultural experience at the very least. I have no idea where we're sitting here right now as far as the amount of funds raised, etc. But, DAOs are about rewarding folks who take leadership and ownership and lean in. And I can imagine there's no shortage of opportunity to do that even here today as you listen on Thursday morning. So hop into the Constitution DAO on Twitter. Julian, Will, we're going to share some links in our show notes to you folks. Everybody knows who you are already, Will, because you've been all over the show just so many times and all the retweets, etc. But Julian, it's been an absolute pleasure to get to know you over the last little while and just to see the level of giving a shit that you bring to your work and to this project specifically. So really appreciate you spending the time here with us. And if there's anything else you want to leave our audience with, I'll give you a moment here to do that.
I think I'm good. The ConstitutionDAO.com is where you can actually contribute. And you're listening to this, it's Thursday morning. We're really excited to have you in the Discord, have you be a participant in deciding sort of the future of this copy of the Constitution. It's going to be great.
Awesome, gentlemen. Appreciate your time, and we'll see you guys on the internet.
Thank you so much.
Welcome, Sirsu. Can you just give yourself a brief intro?
Awesome. My name is Sirsu. I'm a designer. I'm an artist, sometimes an activist, and I am a very large fanatic of history. I've entered into the crypto space back in 2016, working in construction and logistics, supply chain management, and slowly found myself into the crypto space when it relates to culture and all of Web3. I think I found sort of the place that not only is an area that I can kind of flex my entire bit of expertise from service design to anthropology and design thinking, but also a place where anything is particularly possible. We are kind of crafting the future in real time.
So you've sort of gained a lot of attention for being outspoken. I think that you refer to yourself as being sometimes an activist, but I think you've really stepped in. There's no doubt challenges in Web3 around, sure, accessibility, but diversity for sure. And this is something that I've seen you, both in our private conversations and your Twitter feed, which is exciting very often. You've been taking action and building and sort of, would you consider things like the Cookout and BlvkHvnd part of your activism, or I'm really curious about those two projects.
A little bit. I would say the Crypto Cookout is more so kind of like the full embodiment of that activism, since it deals with themes of reclamation of digital identity and sort of collective action, community ownership, generational wealth, things of that nature and that through line. And then BlvkHvnd, I think, is in many ways unapologetically black, but also just very much rooted in gaming culture and a lot of the initial things that really taught me what community actually means. And so I feel like that kind of is like this really cool love letter to my childhood, but also being able to say there's something there that I can build on. But I think the cookout is definitely more so like this is boots on the ground, grassroots, real media activism in a sense, and hopefully looking to find ways to expand that further.
So for those who are unaware, the cookout was a series of party bids to purchase 2 CryptoPunks that I guess were generally, I mean, the black CryptoPunks or CryptoPunks of color were being grossly undervalued compared to those of, well, white CryptoPunks or even
white CryptoPunks, zombies, green, apes, all green, the other, everything else. Exactly. It was weird, but yeah.
Yeah, so like you really like in the course of a weekend brought a ton of attention together. And what was the result of those 2 party bids?
We had about 432 contributors in total, pulled together close to $850,000, I think, in USD value at the time. That was roughly about 210 ETH. And we bought 2 CryptoPunks affectionately named Holly and Tiara.
Yes, proud supporter of both of those. So you're like, you have a lot of experience in this sort of bringing people together to go bid something. So obviously, you know, we're speaking here today specifically about this project, Constitution DAO, that is, you know, taking over my Twitter feed for sure. And I think it's bleeding into mainstream media in a bunch of ways, a group of people coming together to buy the Constitution. And, you know, we just had Julian and Will on who were talking about the intentions behind the project. And it's very much around the idea of getting more people, more attention into Web3, the sort of collective ownership over one of like a fairly seminal document in the history of democracies. And, you know, I think they would argue in human rights as well, though I think there's obviously a whole other part of the story here that, you know, I think has sort of arisen alongside the interest in this sort of project. And so we're seeing some very thoughtful critique of the project. And I think, you know, you are one of those voices who just consistently raises from the crowd. And so I'm curious, like, what is your general take on Constitution DAO specifically?
Word. So yeah, it's definitely something I've followed. I had a couple of people that were working on organizing it that reached out to me to talk about kind of bringing the cookout and things of that nature in there. And so what I had told them initially too, and sort of my general through line take is, you know, this document is incredibly political by nature. It is in many ways the stamp of America. It's sort of like the founding of it, at least back 245 years ago. But that document and the time in which it was sort of made and the folks that looked like me that were a part of America at that time were not represented in the fairest of ways, if at all. And so that kind of creates like this sort of thing where the act of buying this document is in many ways incredibly political too. And we can't take the politics out from this document and just say that this is a group rallying cry to get access into Web3. Sure, that's part of it. But the other part of it is that by buying this political document, we are now stewards of, in many ways, America's founding culture. And so what does that mean for the people who hold it? By having that responsibility of being one of the members of these documents, for instance, let's just say randomly all these other copies disappear. And this is the last document that is here, right? For us, are we willing to carry that responsibility of having this document that holds America's values? Or, for instance, are we able to say, let's have a hard look at what America has become and what America is, and could this be a catalyst to change it or to make something else of it? So for me, it's a very contentious document because there's more weight to it than I think a lot of people realize. I just want people to intentionally think about the act of buying this and what happens afterwards. Because this is not just a win for Web3, but this could be potentially a win for America, but it also could be a virtue signal, the same sort of post-racial society ideology that people had when Obama came into office. But we realized after he was in office, racism showed up in other ways. And we had police shootings that were monthly and monthly, that turned into daily, then that turned into a memeified president taking office, Donald Trump, for instance, and then now where we are now. So for me, my take is not like doom creating, but it is just saying there's a lot more to this than folks think.
So I'm seeing some pushback, and so full disclosure, I'm Canadian, and so this document has like a whole it's more mythological than it is real in any sense to me. But I think some of the critique is even directly calling this document racist. Is that sort of like a general feeling or belief? I'm truly ignorant of like obviously not the broader politics around it, but around like the impact or gravitas of that one document.
Absolutely. It's racist in a couple different ways. One of the articles, I think it's Article 1, Section 2, specifically talks about political power when it comes to states, and how if you have folks that are jailed, not necessarily jailed, I'm trying to figure out the right terminology for this, but essentially it's folks who are not free. And we can connote that folks who are not free are current slaves, which are people who look like me, are regarded as 3/5 of a man, which changes the type of political power that those people hold. But what it did is that it didn't give us agency within that political power, but it gave slave owners agency, that they were able to use the slaves that they had as political points to have constituents to vote for them. So that type of fundamental policy that's written within the Constitution is basically saying, if you have slaves, that means you can make some things happen. And if you think about American Civil War that happens in the 1800s, you can kind of see why there's butting heads from both from the North and the South. They're trying to retain their political power, and the Civil War had threatened that. So it's not just about states' rights, but it's about also keeping the power that they had most graciously, I suppose, wielded, at least in the benefit for them. So it's definitely racist, at least in that context, for sure.
That's helpful. I had heard of that, but didn't realize that was in this document. I feel very lucky to have such thoughtful human beings in around our community to be able to flag these sort of things, because I feel like I'm always sort of like muddling my way forward in a very subtle ignorance around a lot of the stuff. I can understand the pushback in that sense. It sounds like, so there's other sort of thread I'm seeing of sort of critique of this around just sort of like the use of money, like $20 million could be used, or whatever the end up price could be used for so many better things. And which I think is an interesting critique, and one that can probably be leveled at many things in the crypto space rather fairly. But I did see this idea of repatriation DAO that kind of, I think one of your followers or somebody that you follow had shared. I'm not sure of their name. I don't know if you know their names.
I know David Phelps had talked about it.
Right. Okay.
And then the Incredible Rabbi had also talked about it as well.
And so,
go ahead.
I mean, the takeaway that I even have from like your intro to the sort of criticism or concern around it was less about the act of buying it, but more about the responsibility of owning it. And I think like Will and Julian and probably many of the other contributors to Constitution DAO would sort of at least acknowledge that there's so much going into buying this thing now, but truly like the hard work or the big opportunity follows or comes after. You've captured this attention. You have people in community now. Now, what are you going to do with it? What would you say to folks who say this is successful and now this responsibility is on their shoulder? What are the things that we should be thinking about, or what are your hopes for maybe how this document would be stewarded?
That's an excellent question. I think the first thing is for that entire group to understand kind of the general makeup of all the people that have contributed. Are there people that look like us, like me, that are there? Are there people that are, for example, trans or LGBTQ, for example, in that community, right? Because we know that for many of us, there have been levels of contention when it comes to America, America's values, and America's politics around our identity and our way of life. And so if you can identify, if they want themselves to be identified, that's also the other thing too. If they dox themselves in a sense, at least for that part of their identity, there's a honest conversation that could potentially happen with these groups to say, listen, like, we've contributed to this because maybe we see that there is this level of optimism in leveraging this as a catalyst for some other political lever. And as a result, we definitely need your help and your allyship in order to make that happen. Right. And I think that kind of conversation should be had. I don't know if it can, but it should be had if possible. because at least that allows everyone else to really level set and kind of understand the weight and the gravity of what just happened. It's not just about, oh my God, we got $20 million or $10 million or however much the sale is, but it's also about kind of like, now that all of us have brought this thing together, we bought this document, we can see it in a museum or something to that effect. We are now one of the vanguards of America's lifeblood. And if something happens to this document, we are responsible for it. But if we, for example, one idea that someone had posed was to, in an act of protest, political protest, burn it, right? Let's say that happens, which if I was a part of this Constitution DAO, I probably would vote for it. But would that group be willing to accept the responsibility, the backlash, for instance, of an act like that? Not that it's treasonous, because it's not, because we do have the Bill of Rights, thankfully, right? First Amendment rights to freedom of speech that does protect us. But are we ready to have that kind of real conversation as to why we believe that, for example, those values are outdated and that we were presenting with a new ideal? And I'm often thinking about art history and how the presentation of one movement was then rejected by a succeeding movement. So if you think about Dadaism, for example, they came through early 1900s saying, everything that you know about Cubism, everything else is trash. Like, Dada is the wave. Futurism is the wave. This is what we're doing here. This is what real art is. And then after that, another movement said, whatever they're talking about is hogwash. This is the new thing, right? And so we have this history of rejecting ideals that might be outdated. And I think after 245 years, we can ask ourselves, is it still working for us? And if so, then what about it does work? And if not, could we present something different now that we do have this opportunity of owning a document of such political weight?
Fascinating. I'd be fascinated to see what the actual breakdown of contributors are. I've been watching the channel and seeing, it's probably approaching 1,000 ETH at this point, 910 ETH as I'm looking at it here right now on Monday afternoon.
Wow.
Pacific time. And so it's about maybe a quarter of the way where they need to get to. And we're seeing a lot of like 0.05, 0.1, 0.001 ETH contributions. Obviously anonymous folks, or at least we don't know sort of the breakdown of it. But I hazard to guess that it's going to be very skewed in the same ways that most crypto projects are skewed, right? Like some data out there around, 75% being male, of, vast majority of those being white. I'm curious, and I think as I sent you a message before, like the last thing I want to talk to you about is just being like my one black friend in crypto, but like you're one of a few, and it is like a representation of the big challenge I think we have. And so like my expectation is that you're probably going to get a lot of conversations like this, and I'm like seriously, I don't want you to be like I don't want that to be our relationship, but I also think it's an interesting window. And I think you've been very much at the forefront of trying to sort of address these in a way that I really respect, which is not purely about criticism, it's through action. And I'm curious, like, what is the hopeful part for you here? Like, what do we do here, whether it's within Constitution DAO or more generally, that, we're very much in danger of sort of retrenching the existing power dynamics here in Web3. Like, I think it's a concern that we all should be very aware of, and as being, the reality today, I think, slightly different, but very similar in its distribution. How are you thinking about sort of tackling that, addressing that? What should we be thinking about?
Word. Another excellent question. Has anyone told you that you're a great interviewer? Because if they haven't, I will be the first to tell you that you're incredible.
We'll just get Samsonite to cut that and use that as a cut block.
I love that. That's a great promo.
Yeah.
No, so I think for me, what I enjoy doing is being incredibly open about how I feel about things. I think it not only helps me process thoughts in a very cogent way, but it can offer a particular window that other people can look into. And I had a conversation with someone on Twitter earlier today, and he was offering their perspective. And, I told them that, hey, listen, all I offer is perspective and then my personal choice, the things that I'm going to be doing. And every choice that you decide to make is entirely up to you. You own those choices, just like I own mine. And I think that's a beautiful thing about crypto, is that we have this level of sovereignty and ownership of our own actions. And so I think, like, to continue to sort of address a lot of these issues, what I will give credit to this Constitution DAO is that it invited this level of conversation. And I think that's kind of like the formative first thing, right, is to at least even talk about the dissenting opinion, and to kind of give light to some of the other perspectives that actually may be beneficial and useful for us. And I often think about critical thinking and folks just taking another second to pause and wonder, I'm looking at it from the perspective that I know I've looked at things. What if I put that aside and thought about it from the lens of someone else that I don't know, like a friend or a family member or someone that is of differing experience? How might they see this? Assuming they know the same language of Web3 or assuming they don't, right? What does that look like? And I think the more we start kind of having these sort of these personas in our head that we can ping ideas towards, the more that we will kind of come to better and more holistic conclusions about what type of work we want to put forth and the viewpoints that we can offer when conversations are happening about things like this. Because this is not going to be the only document of political reverence, for example, or of some sort of historical reverence that's going to be available for us to bid on or for us to own collectively. It just so happens that there's an opportunity here to make a statement with this. And so if we look at what we're doing in this space as case studies, then we ask ourselves, okay, if this is going to be presented in this sort of context, if something else like this comes down the fore, how might we look at it? How might we approach it? Would it be a good idea? And if it is a good idea, then what are those levers that we can really pull on? And if it's not necessarily a good idea, then what can we do maybe as a response? For instance, there's been some counter in relation to the Constitution, but also saying, well, what about the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, which then wrote in the abolishment of slavery and, of course, voting rights and things of that nature, right? What about reclaiming and buying those? How might that actually be beneficial to us? That could be something that's interesting. And of course, repatriation, reparations, a lot of those other kind of conversations, these can even pour into things like, well, how do we solve crises in housing, or how do we solve crises in food deserts or information deserts, right? There's a litany, of course, of world problems that we potentially can solve. And if the Constitution DAO ends up being the jump off point for those conversations to then inspire action, then I would call that part of success. Not necessarily the owning of it or anything related to that, but I think just the fact that we're having this conversation, if it inspires others to say, let's do something different and something more radical, then I think that would be incredible. I hope that answered your question. I think I kind of did a little bit of some things. I don't know.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, listen, I think I largely agree with that statement. I think, my personal reaction to this was one of being, I'm fascinated with this space and with building in the space and with communities building in the space. And, while C Club's not directly involved in Constitution DAO, we have many of our members are and have been in conversations with them. It's just building something a little bit different than what's sort of core to what we build. But I'm just fascinated. There's just so many lessons to be learned in all of this stuff. And I think, the two things that was sort of standing out to me and as you were sharing there was one, just helping me refocus why I find this interesting. And I think it is a window into the building of this thing and just something that can capture broad appeal and attention. I think that's just such I truly believe that to be a big and worthy thing. But then two is just this constant reminder of crypto equals responsibility or Web3 equals responsibility. And that level of responsibility is actually grows, right? It's larger than maybe just holding your private keys. Maybe just sort of as a way of closing here a little bit, what would you like to leave our audience with? So context here, we've had an amazing run here with the Seed Club podcast. We've had some amazing guests on. I think this episode is going to be very popular just given the timing. I just love being able to talk with people who give a lot of shits about the space. And you are obviously one of those people. And we have a long history relative to Web3 and stuff like that. So I've got to know you through a very few different stages. And I think I'd really just see you stepping onto the stage in such a, I think how you phrase that, just sharing your opinion and speaking honestly about how you're feeling. I just respect the hell out of that. So long-winded way of me saying the heck do you want to tell people here? What are you either working on? What would you like to leave people with? Yeah.
Word. I'm going to say you can follow me at Sirsuhayb on Twitter. SIRSUHAYB. That's pretty much where you're going to see all of my activity. And all the stuff that I'm working on, it's in my profile. I don't think I need to get into that specifically, but I think in relation to this kind of conversation and about the creation of DAOs and, just even thinking about my experience at C Club 2, is that this space is incredibly powerful and liberating if you anchor the work that way. And I think that we all are starting to feel the weight shift in our direction in different ways about how we can leverage our responsibility to make something really incredible. No matter how small or minute the idea might be, we have an opportunity to let our ideas run wild. And there are so many incredible people that are willing to join in that journey with you. Despite the critique that I have about buying the Constitution, for instance, the fact that there are an incredible amount of people rallying together for a cause like this does give me pause, right? It gives me this hope that there are other opportunities in sort of that similar vein that people like me can take action on and be really happy and inspired about. It's not just about like the Crypto Cookout being an example, or just even the first party bid of the zombie punk, right? Day of the Dead, for instance, being incredibly successful too. But we've been able to see a lot of these other micro effects happening. If we're thinking about Halik Mall and Holdersland, or we're thinking about Daniel Allen and his particular crowdfund initiative, or we're thinking about M Club, or we're thinking about the Crypto Society DAO, for instance, about bringing liberal arts into this space, right? Like there's a litany of ideas, and if you have one, then we invite you to present it. And if it needs some help, some smithing around the edges, then the C Club is a place for you to go to sharpen that knife, for instance. And when you're ready to really put that out there, then there are many people in the space that are just looking for that thing that they identify with, that says, that's me, and they'll join it. This space is like the most incredible plug and play multiplayer experience I think I've ever been a part of. And I just want to leave people with this idea that things can truly be limitless. There's a whole lot of work behind making that possible, but the audacity that we can have in this space to do something like, buying the Constitution, for instance, or reclaiming Black CryptoPunks, for example, or whatever the case is, right? It's not just possible, but it's happening right now. So hop in the bus. We're going to crypto.
Seriously, I appreciate you taking time out of your Monday evening on short notice to join us here and share your perspective. I encourage everybody to go give them a follow on Twitter. It's at the very least entertaining, but very most likely educational. Thank you, sir. We'll see you soon.
Thank you. Chat soon, brother.